Hi, Ron Warren here. In Mark chapter 9, verse 33, Jesus is having a conversation with his disciples. You may be familiar with this conversation. They're having a little bit of a discussion, and Jesus says, "What are you guys talking about?" And it turns out that they were having a discussion about who's the greatest. It's interesting, they've had this conversation before. And it's interesting when you think about that conversation because Jesus actually didn't chastise them for wanting to be great. I mean, if you think about it, the disciples were actually created by God, like all of us, who's a great God. And as a result, well, we should want to be great. We're created by a great God in his image, so greatness is something that we want. No, here's what Jesus actually did. What he did for his disciples is he helped them understand what greatness actually is. Now, let's think about that, right? So he goes through the story and he starts to define the greatness, and he says, listen, if you want to be great, then what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to be the servant of all. So what he basically did, he moved from self-centeredness to other-centeredness when he defined greatness. But he did something more here. He actually took a little child and brought him into the midst of the disciples. And he said, whoever welcomes one of these little ones also welcomes me. Now let's think about it for a second. Let's unpack that in terms of what happened here. Well, greatness was tied to service, and then service was tied to the vulnerable. And Jesus used the little child in order to illustrate this point. And that makes a lot of sense, because when you think about it, even out in the world, greatness is actually linked that way. So if you get a Nobel Peace Prize, it's not given to those who serve the powerful, it's given to those who serve the vulnerable. And let's say you're a fireman and you're rushing up into a burning building and you come down a long hallway and you've got two doors. And on your right, the door says gym and there's 20 bodybuilders. And on the left, the door says nursery and there are 20 babies. If you come rushing out of that building with the 20 bodybuilders, are people going to call you great? I don't think so. And this conversation around greatness is very relevant to our issue. As you probably know, my wife Yvette and I had a unplanned pregnancy when we were in college. And when she went to go see the nurse basically tried to encourage her to have an abortion. And if you think about that conversation, the nurse said, well, how are you going to graduate from college with a baby? How are you going to become a doctor with a baby? That's really a conversation about what? Greatness. What she's actually saying to her is that you've got these hopes and dreams that you think are going to make you great. And you're not going to be able to have those things if you have this child. And this is the same kind of conversation that's happening in every abortion clinic with every woman and every man. It's really a conversation about greatness. It's questions about your hopes, your dreams, your aspirations, all the things you thought that you were going to have, but somehow this baby is not going to allow you to have those things. And here's the thing. What they're telling these men and women is exactly the opposite of what Jesus said. Remember, Jesus defined greatness not by serving the powerful. He defined greatness by serving the vulnerable. And that's why in the aftermath of an abortion, it's so painful. Because when you really come to grips with what you've done, you realize that you've been deceived. I'm reading this book by Guy Condon called Fatherhood Aborted. And he tells of a conversation he had with a post-abortive father. And here's what the guy says. Every year on the anniversary of the abortion, I experience a terrible pain inside, thinking about the life that was lost, the home runs that will never be hit, or the dance recitals that will never be. It's an ache inside of me. You see, he was robbed of an opportunity for greatness. Robbed of an opportunity for greatness. And that's why we have such an urgency to reach folks who are considering abortion. We got to help them understand that they can have the desires of their heart, the greatness that God put within them, but that greatness is tied to not serving themselves, but serving the vulnerable. You see, what looks like a problem, or that the world says is a situation, is really an opportunity for greatness. Now think about it. There have probably been more children that have been named Mary and Joseph in the Western world than any other name. Why? They faced an unplanned pregnancy, what some would certainly describe as a problem, but they protected the vulnerable, the little one. And now they're called blessed. They're called great. So that's why the work that we do at CareNet and at pregnancy centers is so important and, well, great. And that's why we never grow weary of doing great. Until next time, blessings to you.